Welcome everyone to another Shitlords Unite. So we're repeating this with Mythril Shield. You've been on before. We had a quite an extensive talk last time, and you said you wanted to repeat this, so I invited you again. And yeah, I put all your links, by the way, in the description if they want to check out your channel. And yeah, so we didn't really have any topics going into this, and just kind of wanted to go where we went from last time, which was just general stuff. But there was something that happened. Well, for me, it was last night, and to give you some context for those who aren't who haven't seen this. It's basically Ryan Johnson now going after gamers and Gamergate. He mentioned it in a tweet, and I don't even know why he did this. There are two tweets I believe he had. One of them was um, this is simply not the case, and we're years past the point where anyone buys that framing. If you look at its origins, GG has always been exactly what it started out as, a vicious misogyny fueled harassment campaign. And there was another one here. I'm always amazed how few people know about Gamergate. It's not only the key to understanding so many violent harassment campaigns going on today, it's lots of the same people angry about the same stuff using the same playbook.
Yeah, that was interesting to bring that genie out of the bag again. I kind of understand why, but it's unfortunate that, and not entirely surprising that Ryan Johnson got swept up in that. All things considered,
You know,
but
I'm not really surprised, but just generally looking at what Ryan Johnson is doing, I just have to wonder what the hell is he doing?
well, looking at his history of tweets, I think it kind of makes sense. There was one really good exchange he had with somebody about what Star Wars was to him and why he did the movie he did. And he said like he just followed the story forward in the way that it impacted him and the way he interpreted it. And that seems obvious. And if you look at other things where he's talked publicly, and other than dismissing the Star Wars fan base in some of the ways he does seem like a really genuine person. And it seems like he does care a lot about several things, and he probably injected that into the movies, just trying to do some good in the world from his perspective.
Yeah, but because I see Star Wars as being the big culture war battle going forward. Did you see it as the same thing?
Um, I see Hollywood as doing that. I don't think it's exclusive to Star Wars by any stretch. I think it's infected Star Wars from the outside coming in. Um, but I don't. I also don't think it's irredeemable. There seems to have been some shakeup at Lucas, from what I read, due to the falling numbers from the new movie and from Solo. Solo was, I think, the first flop the Star Wars franchise has ever experienced. So there's a lot of things, and purportedly, I obviously don't know people directly, but I read that those who would make the decision, for instance, want Kathleen Kennedy out. Like they're just not happy with the way things are going. But also because of what she's done and her position and a lot of all the public posturing, nobody really wants to take that job. Nobody wants to deal with the fan backlash and try to redeem the franchise, and nobody wants to replace a woman in Hollywood, really. So it's a really interesting situation.
Yeah, because I see it as, so we had first it was the atheism plus thing, then it was slowly but surely leaped over into gaming, and then it turned into Gamergate, and it moved over to comics, and now it's going over to movies where in regards to what we see in Star Wars right now. And Star Wars is the biggest IP. It has games, it has movies, it has TV shows, it has merchandise, everything. And
Yeah, almost everything with a Star Wars name on it has been successful up until recently.
yeah, and just looking at it from when Kathleen Kennedy took it over, she took over basically a franchise that was the most popular thing in the world at the time she took over from George Lucas, to making it the most divisive thing in the world within like 4 years.
Uh,
How?
it might be close. Star Wars fans have always been really impassioned. Even when the prequels came out, the amount of anger and vitriol was definitely palpable. I mean, the guy who played Jar Jar, for instance, I just recently read that he got so much crap for that role, and I didn't like it, but I never concluded that somebody doing something that made me unhappy meant I should go and make them miserable. But apparently he got it so bad that he contemplated suicide because he just couldn't take it.
Yeah, but you also
So,
have to take media's role, because I've
oh
seen
yeah, of
people
course.
I've seen people dinging up headlines of people basically telling, go and harass this guy, look at how bad Jar Jar and the actor is. And it's the same media going around, oh, Kelly Marie Tran is a victim, even though she never said so herself, and just blaming it on fans. And we see this, that's why I have a big issue right now with the people running Star Wars, not the franchise itself. Is Chuck Wendig just yesterday said, oh, all everything Star Wars has to be political. And
Mm.
Ryan Johnson doing this, saying this statement, it's not the what that he's mentioning GG that is the bad thing. Now he's just insulting everyone who didn't like his movies. He's going after gamers as well now, not just Star Wars fans in general. And I'm like, what are you doing? You
Well,
have a trilogy coming out.
I don't think he's going after anybody. I think he honestly believes what he says. Like, it's funny because of a tweet I put out that we were talking about before we started this live, where I said, originally I thought Gamergate was what he's saying it is now, and I actually did a video to that effect. My first video on Gamergate was about like exposing some of the shittier behavior in the community to the public. So maybe there's some changes. But then I got talking to guys like yourself. I saw Sargon. I met actual Gamergate supporters, and I was like, there's a lot of misinformation going around here, and it's when you can see it from the outside, then get in and see it from both perspectives, it becomes hard not to assume some weird underlying motivation. But a friend of mine actually put it best. I think it's just a matter of the information age is also the misinformation age, and as soon as the misinformation cycle starts, it seems like it's just impossible to stop it, and the media just sort of plays into it, and they're not exactly in the business of correcting themselves and looking like they don't know what they're talking about, so they're just going to double down every time.
Yeah, and it just, I mean, it just looks really bad, because I just did a video on Colbert, and I didn't actually realize until I was almost done with the video that his bashing of fans, because he made it like a sarcastic trailer which was just bashing on men. But he said actually
In
that
regard to what, I didn't see it.
um it's basically telling all men are men babies for harassing Calamar Retran. And he said in that trailer that all the men were gone. Calamar Retran was now the main actress in the new upcoming movie. Ray chopped off all the men's penises, and they're done with dealing with man babies and stuff like that. And what
Interesting.
I can send you the link for this, and you can watch it afterwards. And
That sounds like borderline shitlord behavior to me. It's kind of
y-
good.
yeah, but the problem is it was in collaboration with Lucasfilm, and Colbert was actually bashing the fans during
Of
this.
which he is one. Let's be real here.
Huh?
Of which he is one. I mean, I think the only fandom that he's got a bigger boner for would be Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, exactly. And I find that's the most ironic thing here is, what if people started bashing Tolkien fans? He would be the first one to defend them.
Maybe. Keep in mind he's in Hollywood and he needs to keep his job, so he does have to toe the party line. There's plenty of people who have talked out about it. If you come out as right wing in any way, you just get blacklisted everywhere. So to some extent, he has to pander to that thinking because those who make decisions will just boot him right out. But I mean, I think there is a legitimate case to at least some extent to face, for instance, what Kelly Marie Tran did have to deal with online, and I don't think it was fair to her at all. Uh, Doing your job as an actor, even in a role that's poorly written and just shits all over for an established franchise like Star Wars, shouldn't translate into the amount of negative horse shit she got on a daily basis from people. Like, we talked about this last time about having some grace and dignity and treating human beings like human beings. And even if you think it's a joke, like if you don't know this person, they have no reason to believe that. And especially with the internet as it is, as a social media platform and as almost the exclusive way people socialize, like somebody who hasn't built up those defenses dealing with it the way she had to deal with it, that can cause some severe distress. So I don't think there's any justification for it.
Yeah, I mean, any harassment or anything like that, full or wholeheartedly like condemn anything she got. But it's hard to know if how bad it was and how much it was and things like that. And
That's true, and it's definitely not all Star Wars fans. It's probably that same like 300 people that get together and make everyone's lives miserable. But
yeah, that
yeah,
is true. But just it's just like a thing, just looking at it from, like, I love Star Wars. I know a lot of other people, you probably like Star Wars as well.
yeah. My mom tells me when I was like 3 and 4 years old, I used to run up to people and claim to be Luke Skywalker. Star Wars meant a lot to me growing up.
Yeah, and just it's just frustrating to see, because I've seen like clips of Kathleen Kennedy claiming like, "Oh, we're gonna take care of the franchise. We're gonna respect what Lucas is doing," except for they started off and they basically let Kylo Ren look at the camera and say, "Let the old things die." But they're still going back to the well with Solo and Rogue One, and trying to cash off nostalgia all the time. But when it's convenient, they just want to kill off all the old characters. Now, Lando has pretty much been confirmed to be in episode 9. I mean, they're gonna,
Wait, what?
yeah,
Really? Is it Billy D. Williams?
yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
I, I'm really concerned about that because I don't know if he's gonna be the pansexual robot loving version which we have now,
You
because
know,
the
I heard about that. Do you know who Mauler is?
yeah.
Like the Unbridled Rage videos. That's all I know about Solo is what he talked about. I was not gonna go see it, and man, you knew before it ever got released that one, it was gonna be poorly written, and two, it was going to do massive injustices to established charming characters. Like you can't be charming and male anymore, so that was obviously not going to survive. And honestly, Billy D. Williams is so smooth. it's entirely possible that Lando was pansexual, but it seems like it was never a focus, and it never really mattered to telling a good story. And now it's like you have to make a point of it because representation, and it just detracts from everything else so bad.
I mean, you can tell that stuff in the books, and those who would be into like the extended lore of the new Disney universe, they would probably enjoy it, of like getting explained of how Lando is pansexual, or I'm just gonna call
Mm-hmm.
it bisexual because uh because
Well,
that's
robots wouldn't be included in that though. Bisexual
yeah.
is strictly the genders of humanity. Pansexual, from the explanation that I read, was basically you fuck everything that moves. So
Yeah, but from what I understand, the writer said also aliens, but that would be mean like xenosexual as well.
right, and that's where I start to wonder. Like, does that also mean like bestiality? Like, where exactly does it stop? Well, right, because aliens are effectively animals to us. It's just another species. So
That's a
it is kind of
very good point. That would basically be bestiality or xenosexual, or however you would. Yeah,
well,
that
a
is.
droid for sure.
Yeah, I, I watched Solo, a Star Wars movie, on the Wednesday the week came out because I got an
Okay.
early showing. I was one of the first people in the world who actually watched it, and there were three other people with me during the premiere in this cinema, and I'm like, this is not gonna turn out very well, is it? And
Three
just
people
what?
on. Wow. Okay.
So we were four people in total, and so when I was watching it, it feels like they made Han Solo a Gary Stu without being a Gary Stu,
What do you mean, a Gary Stu?
like a male version of Mary Sue.
Oh, right, right. Yeah, plot armor up the ass, without a doubt. You know, that's the funny thing though too, and that's the sad thing. Like, when I heard that Disney was acquiring Star Wars, I was really happy with it because they did such a good job with Pirates of the Caribbean. I figured that level of writing and storytelling and character development could exist, and you could have done something like that. Like, Solo could have been the Jack Sparrow of Star Wars and just been incredibly lucky, and it could have at least made for a fun thing because you know he's going to survive. But from at least what I saw in Muller's video, it's just like there were certain things that I expected to happen in the movie in terms of taking things away from Han Solo's character that didn't, but other things, really, really odd, like a train in the Star Wars galaxy. But at the same time, you could kind of see that like maybe the planet is not as advanced as the rest of the galaxy.
Yeah,
Who knows?
that's not my biggest gripe with them, because I could see it like it being cheaper to build a train like that
Yeah,
to carry more carry more load. So that, I mean, I could understand the criticism, but I can also understand like there being a so-called train. But the problem is all the SJW undertones with the droid, which were so
yeah,
unnecessary.
yeah. I heard about that. Where apparently, like, Lando's going to the back, says, "Do you need anything?" And she turns and says, "What, equal rights?" Something like that. Because
Yeah, no, when we meet her, she's basically droids lives matter, and this when droids are fighting in his where he's at a casino, and you also have she's basically talking about her periods uh, when she's a droid.
really,
Yeah,
wow.
I'm like, Jesus Christ, what are you doing? I don't know what the Lord and Miller take was gonna be, because it feels like they were taking the piss out of the character, like making it a parody of social justice, and somehow the writers, because they got fired before the shooting was done,
Oh,
and
maybe.
then they just made everything else serious, but kept like the concept of the droid how it was, and just made it a an SJW character instead.
Maybe they were joking, and that's why they got fired.
Yeah, because the reports were they let the actors ad lib and try to get the scenes to be more fluent and more dynamic and natural. Because they are good directors, but why the fuck is Kathleen Kennedy hiring people like that, and then she gets surprised when they do exactly what they are supposed to be good at?
Well, I don't think there's any question why she does the thing she does uh, at all. I mean, there's. I don't want to misquote her, but there's things out there where she talks about what she intends to do. I mean, like you said, she's going to stay true to the originals. But keep in mind too, stuff like that is a matter of interpretation. Like Ryan Johnson, I'm sure he thinks that he's maintaining the spirit. I've talked to several people, just random strangers, who have praise for the Last Jedi, and they think the spirit is maintained. They think Luke Skywalker's storyline is completely consistent, and I completely disagree. And so does Mark Hamill from everything I've seen. So it's really just it's pure interpretation, and that's always what movies are going to be. That's always what a new director was going to be. Uh, the ultimate bottom line for me is I've concluded that the way that they're moving with it now, it's not my Star Wars. Honestly, I think it's that simple.
Yeah, and it's just a thing within the bigger parts of like Hollywood and the culture. It's frustrating to see when people like Chuck Wendig just say, "Oh, everything is supposed to be political because war is political." But like, if you think about it, what was the politics of the original trilogy? There were none. There were themes.
Uh, hmm. Yes, Star. I think Star Wars should be an exception to that. To some extent, I think you can't avoid things being political, especially if it's war.
Yeah,
But
well, you can talk about politics, but like, don't insert certain like force the politics down our throat, like identity politics or crap like that. You can have
sure,
themes of politics like authoritarianism, the economy, or things like that. Like, just have political themes, sure, but
yeah,
don't make it
allegories.
political. Yes, exactly. That's what
Yeah,
I mean.
I think that's really good movies of the past, especially I would say like during the a 3 decade period, 70s, 80s, 90s. They did that a lot, um, and they did it really well. And I think Mark Hamill probably has the best attitude towards this. Like he admits what he's in the business of creating is escapism, and that's what entertainment should be. There's enough having to deal with the world while you're actually in the world to not have to deal with it in your entertainment too. And Star Wars was always, to me, a really highbrow level of escapism and entertainment. It was classic fantasy storytelling,
Yeah,
and you don't need modern fad politics thrust into that, and it's
because it's timeless.
well, exactly. That's exactly what I've been saying about everything that's happening in probably the past 5 years. Is that it's so consumed with current political climate that I don't think anything's going to survive. I don't think anything being made right now, with very rare exception, is going to be important 10, 20 years from now, because there's no principles, there's no timeless storytelling. It's just here's what we care about now bullshit.
That's why when I actually see a movie that I think that don't try to insert that modernism, if you like this time period and the politics in it, which is why there's just certain movies in my mind that stand out, like like the last few years. Like for example, the Nolan trilogy with Batman. I think that's gonna be pretty much timeless. Uh,
Could be.
because not only does it not rely on heavily on CGI, but it also tells like psychological and philosophical differences between all the three movies, and you don't see that, I think, with a lot of movies right now.
Yeah, there's he did a good job of creating themes in the movies, I think. But I don't know if I would put the writing on the same shelf as other movies that will remain timeless in terms of what it accomplished. The trilogy, like Star Wars, for instance. Star Wars, the original trilogy, is obviously timeless because it touches on timeless things, and the
Yeah,
themes were actually really subtle in it. I didn't even realize some of the things that like George Lucas explained what he was trying to do, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And no wonder it relates to people so well. But things like the Matrix, I think V for Vendetta, the Wachowski brothers did some amazing things. Stuff like that. That no matter what the time period, because it's so based on our simpler natures, it will
yeah,
always have a place.
like the bigger themes, because I think whatever you're into, if it's books, if it's tabletop gaming, music, movies, television, whatever, I think you have that to escape. Because I saw an interesting video from a guy I've been on pretty a lot of streams on, and he talked about how he was basically at the bottom of his bottom rock bottom. He hit basically rock bottom. He had to leave the military, and just didn't know what to do with himself, and he found solace and escapism to just deal in Warhammer, and then later gaming. And I think that's also something that is being lost in when you create these movies, because there also some type of coping mechanism, and when you just shove things down in the throats of people, they just want to have like 2 hours where they just think of something else instead of whatever they're dealing with. It's just not healthy, just generally. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I meant with saying like it is a form of escapism and thrusting daily politics. Like having to deal with the world when you're trying to get away from the world type of stuff. It's not only is it not healthy, it's I really don't know the best way to categorize it, but it's kind of like invading. It's really it seems more like a form of indoctrination and brainwashing, and it's just it, it's really kind of gratuitous and shitty, and it's funny because the SJWs and the people who think like them, I always hated that term SJWs. It's really like enforced left politics, or like politically correct to the extreme now. Like I can't even call it politically correct anymore because it's something totally different and much bigger. But their behavior while they're calling everybody else Nazi is so much like Nazi propaganda that it's actually kind of frightening to me.
Yeah, and just having quotas, and basically everything we don't like or make is basically haram. Is I mean, that's why people aren't watching these movies, because they're just fed up with things getting shoved down the throat, because generally people just I talked about this with on my previous stream with about gaming. When you go and spend money, let's say on gaming or movie, like you could have spent that money somewhere else,
Yeah, on anything.
and yeah, but you chose to spend it on either gaming or whatever helps you to just think of other things like hobbies in general. It's not like it's not the end of the world. Oh, we have movies that have some sort of political agenda with them. It's not going to be at the end of the world, but it does say something when people don't want to watch this and spend their money and time to enjoy this, uh, because you are actually spending money that you have worked for, and you're basically spending your time and energy on this to enjoy it, and uh, it has some implication in the culture generally when you have this political agenda. Just we have seen this in games, movies, television, whatever, and people are just fed up with it because you see this every single day. Trump is bad, the alt right, and all of these things, and in the end, people just want to uh, don't hear about it for like 2 goddamn seconds and enjoy something, but it's impossible these days.
You actually make a really good point, and it's um, if you may not have intended it, but it's really consistent with what Ryan Johnson was saying on Twitter about it's the same groups, even if he got his aiming wrong. If you think about it, in principle, that is very consistent with what made Gamergate such a firestorm. Because what you're getting at principle is people who have limited means, because we all have limited means, because we have to work for our money. So when you're dropping $50, $60 on the game or however much, there's only so many of those you can buy. And you go into it expecting a certain experience, like you would with a sequel, like you do with Star Wars, like the next Halo or God of War or whatever, right? Whatever game, you want to do something. And for most of us, right, it's get away from the day-to-day. So when, for instance, in Gamergate, right, it was because journalists weren't giving honest reviews. So now you go into a game expecting something and you're getting something else, and now that money's gone. Like, you're not getting that back. It's the same thing here when you're thrusting politics into the places where gamers are going, for instance, or moviegoers are going, to not have to deal with that for a couple hours, so that they can sort of decompress and have that time of peace in their minds, where it's like, the world is really difficult to deal with at this point sometimes. Can I please get a break? And now those breaks are being taken away. So it's no surprise if it is the same people in both instances. Why? Because they're all of their places to not have to deal with all of this all of the time are being invaded and turned into more of the same misery that they're trying to get away from.
Yeah, and I mean, we constantly have this barrage of, because we live in a digital age right now. Because just like 20 years ago when we were growing up, it was way different.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could we're kind of addicted to our phones or computers or iPads or whatever, we rely on them either for communication, for our jobs, whatever. And so we either consciously or unconsciously get bombarded with this information in our daily lives. And right now it's whatever you want to call it, SGWs, regressive left's political correctness. uh they are the ones that are dictating a lot of the information that is going out. And just philosophically as well, you only get one side, or like the scale is only to one side. That's why I also like the YouTube in general. Is just it's so unbalanced with its algorithm and striking system, and how they strike down videos. It's just conversations should be like in our culture should be open for discussions. And when it comes to just the movie Death Wish with Bruce Willis, it got so shunned because it had some pro Second Amendment slant, and it would be better to have balance, but also just generally when you're releasing art, that it's not just like art can be political, but there should be a balance, and right now there isn't one, and that is straining to many people's minds, and the people are just fed up with it. That's how I look at it, at least.
Yeah, that's one of many effects. It's extremely slanted, and it's funny. And I'm going to address some of this when I finally do. Actually, you know what? I meant to tell you today at some point after this, after we're done here, I am going to get to work and try to release one of the first videos for the Rethink That channel,
Okay.
about the monk debates, and it kind of relates to that. But I also had an interesting thought that you reminded me of this morning that maybe we fun to dive into. Um, just got to follow a little bit of a logic trail here. So claims about toxic masculinity, right?
Yeah.
I've questioned that. I've thought about it in terms of what is intended and what's the best case scenario. Like, what's the steel man for toxic masculinity if it exists? And I think the simplest way to think about it is if you look at those things that are typically masculine, when they are taken to their extremes, it becomes toxic behavior. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, if unchecked, I think it comes with, like, say, narcissism, and it gets amplified through that.
Right. So, like, what I thought about, like, for instance, so men tend to appeal to objects, right? Like, we will pick up the trucks and stuff like that. We tend to be more aggressive and competitive, things like that. And I think it's easy to see in society where if you overdo that too much, like, one of the examples I thought of this morning was the approach towards women, like the pursuit of women, was what popped in my head. And if you overdo that, you can become one of the creeps who will like follow a woman down the road and much more extreme behaviors. And of course, I I would agree that if you're going to define certain traits like the pursuit of women and being alpha male as masculine, if you take that too far, become one of those guys, that is toxic. So then there's the question, okay, in that case, is there such a thing as toxic femininity? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or not.
Yeah, because I see it right now. Like, I don't want to generalize. I use the collectivism fallacy by saying all feminists are like this, but like I would say the intersectional, the more extreme part of it is the the appeal, so much appeal to emotion that it is stifling, let's say, discussion, free speech. I just before this, I watched Jordan Peterson at Oxford, and he said something very interesting. Then he said, "When how do we measure like a hate speech? Is it with 50% of a room? Is it 1 in 100? Is it 1 in 1,000? How do we measure this?" And when you when you say something is offensive and it should be banned, that the,
Mm,
that is a dangerous precedent. Like, he said, and I agree with this as well. I think US has very good laws regarding free speech. I think Norway has as well. Surprisingly, has good free speech laws because it doesn't take EU laws into consideration when, because the Norwegian constitution supersedes anything the EU has. So when you have the free speech, until you actually incite violence, like, there are some limits to the free speech, where you can harm someone legitimately or hurt their reputation. but other than that, there shouldn't be any restrictions.
No, no,
And
just to clarify, because we have the very left definitions of violence. You're talking about when somebody is actually physically harmed, right?
yeah, like
Okay.
go and shoot that person,
Hmm. Okay.
and or death threats or something like that. Yeah, I should have defined this. But when you have these people, when we're seeing this very very bad instances in Sweden and the UK at the moment, where just wolf whistling or sending mean tweets can get you arrested. Like Goodfella, he was arrested because he made a joke, "Where's your truck of peace when you need it?" I made it like a joke, and he got
Mm.
arrested he had to be in jail for an entire weekend for that. And that's, I think, uh where you have the toxic femininity, where there, because I'm just talking general here, because Jordan Peterson, I like how he phrases this. There are temperaments
Hmm.
between men and women. You have women and men overlap quite a lot more than you think, but
Of
there
course, that
are
we're more the same than different by a
we're
massive margin.
we're the same species, but there are things where we don't overlap as much, where women tend to be more emotional, and I think that is probably the you also see this with taking care, like the motherly love, the protectiveness, where it can also be a detriment, where you want to take, for example, just taking everyone in the world, and it's
See, yeah, yeah.
physical.
See, you're
That
coming to some of the same conclusions that I did this morning. And that's why I brought up the thing about like how men focus on objects and the pursuit of women, so or aggression. So right in the business world, for instance, or in anything where there's competition for resources, there is obvious benefit to being aggressive. And at least in the West, in terms of leadership, there's obvious benefit to being aggressive in moderation. There's a healthy level, and then there is a unhealthy, what you might call toxic level.
Yeah, I would say the good part of it is being assertive and
Right,
being confident and having structure,
right.
and then
So
you
and
then yeah.
so if we're looking at society, right? So we look at just capitalistic structures. You know, aggression tends to lead to success. Um, Pursuit of women tends to lead to marriage if you are healthy about it. Things like that. And overdoing it is obviously toxic. So and I'm picking these things specifically, like so boys' predilection towards objects. That is not only intercultural; it is interspecies. That has been tested and proven. That is an absolute thing between genders.
You see this
And I think
with our
I,
species, like or with monkeys is a very good example.
right, the exact experiment. And so the healthy level of that exists in capitalism, where we automate and use objects and rely on AIs, for instance. The unhealthy level is the part where it's like you know objects become valued and people become managed. That whole thing, and it's an over obsession with the numbers and getting the most out of things without caring about people. So then that's where I think the feminists have a good argument about getting more women in positions of authority and management will help, because human condition does matter. But that's also where I think like you kind of saying the same thing I was thinking about. If there's a toxic femininity right now, I think that's everything we're seeing with Hollywood, in the media, in the feminist movement. It's caring about people so much you can't be objective and reasonable, and you overdo it to the point where it's like society just can't function anymore. Like you care about people to the point where it's just not maintainable.
Yeah, and yeah, that's what I see with Hollywood, where everything has to be inclusive, and everyone has to be represented. They have to feel like they're the ones on screen, which is quite literally impossible,
Yeah.
because then you would have You would need quotas for every movie. So do we have a lesbian? How many people are in the movie? So okay, we need two lesbians in this movie. Okay, how many? Then we need five Muslims in this movie. Then we can only have, let's say, 12 white men. So we also need five or four or five black men. Say that th- that's when you need like I hate quoting Jordan Peterson, but you have a you need to when you're creative, you basically are you have a chaos in his mind. He uses this word chaos, and you
Hmm.
need the structure, and there's a perfect balance between those two.
I believe
And
that. Yeah.
yeah, and when everything is just too much structure, which is you need these and these people when you're creating a story, then you have no story at all. You're just following a blueprint of something that is unfathomable and unappealing to everyone.
See, that's the interesting thing too about it, and that's the contradiction of the left, where it's like they make allowances, for instance, for certain mistakes from certain people, but then there's like this list of unacceptable mistakes, and they believe they are moving society forward, and I believe they're stifling growth. So I don't know how to reconcile that. I don't know how to bridge the gap talking to those people, especially with the internet now. It's like, if you don't agree with me, go away. But it's so dangerous. Like I said earlier about the whole Nazi thing. Did you ever see the kid in the striped pajamas?
um I didn't see the entire thing, but I know the story of the movie. I heard of what happens to it. Yeah.
It's a hard movie to watch. I will admit, and
Yeah.
it was the first time I personally grasped uh, how close human beings gotten to just the levels of evil that they were capable of, that the Nazi soldiers were capable of, and it was like they did something at the end of the movie that just really rammed it home. But there was also, I brought it up because they showed some of the propaganda against the Jews during Nazi Germany, and they were saying things like, the Jew has always controlled the world's wealth, and they used it to oppress all of the other peoples of the world. And you know what that sounds like, right? Like, it's when I heard that, if you watch that movie, just pay attention to when they're playing the Nazi propaganda videos. If you replaced Jew with white person, or like cis white male, you would have the modern far left talking points almost verbatim, and it's frightening.
Yeah, and that's why like I've done a thing lately on Twitter. I don't know how constructive it is, but when I see someone like saying, "Hey, white people," basically STFU,
Mm-hmm.
I just switch the word white with black and just quote it to them, just to see, do you realize what this sounds like, and just to like hammer it home, because
Yeah,
when you
that's gonna go right through the wind tunnel that is the space between their ears, though. Like, they're
yeah, I
not gonna
know,
hear it.
but if I can change just one person and make them realize what they're doing, I mean, that's basically mission accomplished
I
for
would
me.
say
But
not like that. I don't think you're gonna get the results out of that because they feel like white people are an okay group to attack and that you have to do so. Um, and this relates to the whole like child in the striped pajamas. If you can get old Nazi propaganda that sounds exactly like the things they say, but it's Jew instead of like cis white male, I would send them that quote. I don't know where to find these things. Otherwise, I would offer the resource. I've thought about this a little bit, but I think if you could get actual Nazi propaganda, like posters and recordings and things, and when somebody posts something that sounds exactly like it, just white people instead of Jew, send it to them. Let them know how far they've gone.
Yeah, and the discussion, because I went quite I went into quite a lot of discussion with people during that Ryan Johnson tweet, and I just looked at the replies to that, and went through them, and I wanted to engage with these people who basically were saying, "Oh yeah, GamerGate, they did this," and
Yeah, I saw you trying to chat with some people about it.
yeah, I tried to at least, and I there was one woman who actually did some back and forth with me, and I basically said, "Can you prove anything? I would like to know. Is there anything like I'll be willing to have a Twitter is terrible for these things, but I did my
It
best."
really is. God, it is. No, but go
and
ahead.
and I'm like, can you give me a citation on that? And she's like, no, my friends were attacked during Gamergate. They are the most horrible people ever. Whatever she said. And I'm like, okay, what about the FBI and Women Action Media, who is a feminist group, debunked this basically? And she was still saying the same thing.
Well, what do you
And
know? What happened to her friends? Did she go into any detail about it?
no, she just said they got death threats and things like that, and I'm like, well, I got them as well, being part of Gamergate,
Mm.
and I still want to engage with people and be willing and open for discussion. I don't know how many times I've tried during when Gamergate was happening to get these people on my stream to actually discuss things and actually have some conversation or even debate in some form. But they were always they always just brushed it off and suddenly we don't have time for Nazis or things like that.
Hmm. Well,
And
and wasn't there a fund too that Gamergate held to, uh, like, if somebody could show that they were actually attacked, that the fund would be used to try and locate and prosecute the person who committed the harassment, something like that?
well, you had the Gamergate harassment patrol on Twitter, and if they saw, if you went to them, they would report them and either to the police or to Twitter or whatever. And it was people who had quite knowledge with how to track people. They found actually it was Gamergate who found the guy who was harassing Anita Sarkeesian, for example, and he was a guy in Brazil sending her death threats. And they were people in Kotaku Connection and Twitter who actually found out this and got him jail basically for this.
No, the guy in Brazil. What connected him to the Gamergate? Did he actually
No,
use
he
the
did, he didn't have any connection.
hashtag? He didn't even use the hashtag.
No, not to my knowledge. He was just a random guy that sent threats through email or whatever. And people and we found him and we say, hey, he's not with us. We found him and like yeah, that still wasn't good enough.
It's interesting. I To some extent, I think some of these problems actually stem, or maybe all of them, from honestly the education system, the way it's set up. There's there's a conditioning that goes on when the entire program is, here's the right answer, get it right or get a bad grade, and if you get a bad grade, your life is not going to be as good. So you're sort of conditioned to know what you're talking about and to not be wrong. And so then when you're given information, it has to be right, otherwise you're in trouble, right? So,
Yeah, and just like this is anecdotal. I had a friend of mine who was in Berkeley of all places, university, and when he was there, he all he had to do was basically learn the theories that the professor was spewing and basically regurgitating them to the because one of the classes, because he didn't even want to do this, one of them were socialism when he was doing economics, and he was like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah,
And
I've
because
seen communism as a required course. Yeah.
yeah, and just hearing this, I'm like, what the hell? Because we had one lecturer, but she only had half of the course. She was a little bit of a feminist, but when we had the exams, it wasn't really. It was you could take in the perspective as one of the theories when you were trying to explain your reasoning. You could kind of use that kind of that perspective, but it wasn't really big part of what you got taught. But the entire course that he took was basically just saying the same things and that the professor was basically selling these students.
Yeah, and I'm even talking before college. For 12 years, you're I mean, it's all based on the industrial age, right? Like in industrial age, factory owners needed people who would just follow orders, who would be a mouthpiece
Mhm.
for the company, do what they're told to do, the way they're told to do it, when they're told to do it, not ask questions, not use objective reasoning. Like these are the things that needed to be sort of suppressed as a result of the education system, and it hasn't changed in about 100 years. So now, like you get on Twitter, and that's when you've got 12 years plus, say four if they've got a bachelor's degree, of that way of thinking, like that process to thinking or trying to stop you thinking. You've got a bunch of people who, whatever the first idea was that was seated in their mind, it's like brain chemistry will respond in a way like, if this is wrong, it's dangerous, so you have to assume it's right. You have to accept what you're being told as being right. So like the first idea that gets in your head is most likely to stay. And I say this with some self awareness because I've had the experience, at least personally, several times in my life now, of finding out that I was fundamentally wrong about something, and it can be hard, especially if you never go through it in an extreme way, to make a shift from something that seems so foundational to your life. Like I got heavily into Alex Jones and got really scared about the government, and then had the experience of some of his predictions being wrong. So I was like, wait a minute, this is all bullshit. And I had to. That was the moment where I realized, like, there's plenty of evidence to prove anything you want. You have to choose your truths wisely.
Confirmation bias.
Yes, well, and but to more to the point, you really can find evidence to prove anything. You like there's all kinds of information out there. There's contradicting studies, and confirmation bias does play a part, but it's really just a skeptical mind is so important, especially in the information age. Is what it came down to. So then
Mm.
I also had foundational beliefs about the nature of existence and God challenged, and I completely flipped from being what I considered spiritual and assuming there, of course, must be a creative source to no, there doesn't have to be. And that's a really hard shift to make. But I made it, and it's not possible unless you're willing to accept information from people that you either one don't like or two can't make sense of what they're saying, and they seem almost aggressive in their approach. And
Yeah,
it's
I mean, I went to a private school. It's kind of a butt of a joke here going to that school. It's basically the Waldorf school. I don't know if you have it in the states. It's based on Rudolf Steiner's philosophy.
it
Uh,
sounds familiar, but I don't know.
they're the ones usually. They are like we on the when you go to school, we don't usually we use crayons. That's like a big thing, and we don't draw faces because we are just supposed to just draw shapes when in the early years at least. So there's kind of a joke here in Norway that we are like kind of eccentric to say the least.
Okay.
And but what I found interesting just going there, completely anecdotal, of course, but going to the school, you constantly had discussion and you were challenged, uh, trying to get your perspective and having dialogue all the time. You weren't getting like well, and we didn't have any textbooks. We made our textbooks.
Hmm. Interesting.
So when we were writing things down, even for like we didn't have official textbooks until like third and fourth grade when we started. When we earlier, of course, we just wrote down and what was written down on because we weren't that proficient in writing things. But when you go through the classes and higher up, you start when you do your textbooks, you basically write everything yourself, what you think is important, and you have to reason it of why, especially like history, um, and
Hmm.
just generally. And when you have these textbook when you're writing in these textbooks, of course it's a little bit harder with like STEM fields like physics, math, chemistry. You can't really do it, but your chemistry perhaps you can kind of explain the reaction of different items and what happened and things like that. But that's why I'm really grateful because you also got to learn like we had smithing, we had wood shop, we had a lot of tours. We went on glaciers, we went hiking in the mountains, we went fishing, we went because it's not a traditional school in that sense. We did a lot of practical, we did a lot of like introspect. And I'm looking back at it now, I'm really glad I didn't go to like the public school because I don't know, I was once just there just learning how it was there, and it felt like just you were just following orders there. And I'm really grateful I went to that school. And I think that schools in general, not and universities and colleges should strive that people think about things because when you like you said when you have your worldview challenged, you there's usually just two responses: either you're open for it and you can change your mind, or you have the screeching refusal, like the ones we see in the UK with the man baby Trump balloon and saying he's evil, and instead of going
Trump
to
kind of is evil. He's kind of a shithead. We gotta be honest about at least that.
yeah, but he might be a retard or whatever, but go and talk to these people instead of like just saying, "Oh, you're alt right, you're Nazis, you hate women," and things like that, because it's
Yeah.
just fear mongering. It's just fear mongering, and there's no introspection. There's no what
Well,
should I say?
it's tribalism. It's the inability to talk across aisles and consider anything that conflicts with your preconceived notions, predisposed, whatever. Um, it, it boggles my mind. I will admit, and I'll give credit where credit is due. It is hard to question your basic assumptions about reality, and it can feel threatening because, especially because now you have to admit like there's certain things you've been doing for as long as you can remember that were just not based in the truth. But it's and maybe there's a deeper thing there. Like there's a book that's one of my favorite books, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, and he talks about the personality ethic versus the principle ethic, where your identity is wrapped up in superficial things and the things and you are your job and you are your political stance and these things, as opposed to basing your identity on your values, like who you are on the inside, so that everything else can be subject to change and your person is not under threat. And that is obviously something that is not taught on a large scale. But it's funny too because the inability to do that baffles me, in particular when it comes to like the PC SJW crowd, because like I don't think the majority of people who would be atheists in the West started that way. So you, to some extent, have had the experience of having to question and give up. very fundamental thoughts about reality and the value of doing so, because things you would have assumed were absolutely self-evident were, of course, not. So it's a weird situation to me. It's like they lost that lesson.
Yeah, but I also think it's kind of what you have, as you said, values and your personal ethics and your personal morals. And I think what either the extreme right, like the racist, the white supremacists, the Nazis, whatever you want to call these people, and on the extreme left, which is very dominant at the moment, where you have these people who are very good at moral relativism. They they shift, as you said, because you said they have responses to some people some way, and for some other people it's okay.
Right, right. It's very policy based as opposed to principle based.
Yeah, and like a good example is, oh, black people can't be racist,
Yeah, yeah.
or
The
or
whole
or
concept of
or,
reverse racism.
there is no such thing as misery or reverse sexism or reverse racism, or whatever they want to phrase it as. That's peak moral relativism. And when and the ethics behind it, when they actually want to like talk about it, they can't, because their precision isn't, like, they don't have a foundation, like
Well, yeah, because you're talking from two different levels of depth. Like when you address those things and you try to unpack the contradictions and problems with that thinking, you always go principle based, and everything should be principle based. At least, you know, there should be principle underlying it. And if the principles are wrong or not justified, then they need to change. But when you do that with these things, these policy decisions these people make, it falls apart. And this is where that whole thing, like, they can't consider that, because then they have to admit their thinking is wrong, and that's not possible because they have to be right, because that's how you get a good grade on the test, for instance. And it conflicts with everything that they've believed up to this point, and how they've built their worldview and the way they think the world works and how they're interacting with it and how they've treated people. Imagine this, right? As a far left person, you have probably treated people really shitty, and you know it. You've really been an asshole to certain people that you disagree with. You've probably disregarded and cast out friends, which is a really shitty thing to do in principle. And ad nauseum, like every time you repeat something, you're sort of reinforcing it to yourself. How much do you think they've reinforced these ideas for how many years? And imagine having to then reflect, give up all that, realize you were wrong, realize that you treated people really poorly based on wrong ideas and wrong principles, and face the fallout of those decisions, of those behaviors. Like it's a lot.
but I also notice it's like an evil circle. Like, I would call it an evil circle, because are these people really happy if because if they just shun people they don't like, because of their views or opinions. And when I see discussion from these extremists, whether it's alt righters or these extreme leftists, I don't really see that they are really happy. That's at least my experience. I don't know if you have anything to contradict that, but when they at
Yeah.
least do discussions and they are getting challenged, all I see is anger and resentment. When, like, for instance, usually when you see these street debates or whatever, and especially with this race, I haven't really seen them with alt writers, but they're probably out there. You see this kind of hatred in their eyes when someone tries to. Because I saw one. We had this one girl, and she was saying all this nasty stuff to this guy, and like calling him Nazi and all this, and I'm like thinking, why are you doing? Because you're just working yourself up for someone, just to call someone else a Nazi because they have different views, and yeah, I just feel it's an evil circle where they just get more and more miserable, uh, to the point it's just self-destructive because they want to be in their tribe.
Yeah, and I think it is tribalism at its core. It's definitely not just the left. I think both SJWs and anti-SJWs have a massive chip on their shoulder in a lot of ways, and they both get pretty miserable, pretty angry, and pretty vitriolic towards each other. Uh, in varying degrees. But it again, it comes right back to like the things that you're valuing. And it's funny because yesterday I had a conversation with somebody, and we were just bantering and joking, and he was like, "Yo, it's 2018. You gotta accept the way people feel." And I was like, "No, I don't. No, I don't. Some people still feel that all the Jews should be killed in the world. I don't have to accept that. I don't have to allow for that." And so there's a legitimate case to get angry about other people's ideals. But yeah, what's happening in terms of like what you're talking about, it's like an extreme form of tribalism, and the value of my fellow man is kind of not taught. Like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood type of thing. Like I think we need that show back on the air for adults, and we should like wake up every morning and have to watch it or something, because it seems like people don't understand that you're living next to these people, um, whether you agree with them or like them or not, and you have to learn to coexist with them unless their ideas are really extreme. And the problem has become now anything that's not my idea is treated as if it is extreme. And that's where we
Could
are.
Yeah, I mean, I look at them as being emotional immature. I think is the best way to describe it, because I think emotions are like a muscle. If
Sure.
if you have resistance, like if you work out your biceps constantly, they get stronger and they can take more weight, and you might get injured if you overdo it, but you can take more, you can lift more, and you get stronger. So yeah, like for example, if you get divorced, or someone dies, that's like getting injured. There are always going to be scars
Yeah.
in your emotions somehow, either if it's just a dog, if it's an animal, if it's a breakup, if it's a family death, like there. But in general, you can retrain those muscles and become strong, and they're gonna help you if you get injured, and you can get stronger easier. And what I see is these people don't train those emotional so-called muscles, because I see them as just being very weak in their emotions. Because when you first mentioned toxic femininity, they don't want to have resistance, and everything has to be nice, everyone has to be everything has to be inclusive, and nothing has to be offensive. But that's when you get lazy, you get your muscles decay, you get fat in the fictional, or the in the allegory, a metaphor I'm painting here. But that's what actually happens to you emotionally. And when you suddenly have to pick up 100 pounds, you can't do it. You just break down, and you can't move further. And that I think is the problem.
Yeah, that's something I've actually been wondering about, because, and I could be wrong about this, but it seems to me what I see consistently with people, especially the most, um, I'm not sure if it's self-assurance or what it is, but that the most illogical behavior and the most unaware behavior, I would say that's probably the most accurate way to put it, that comes from people who seem to be extraordinarily privileged in their life. Like they had everything right. They had kind of everything given to them, and then they sort of project that out into the world and think, well, everybody like me must have had it that way. Like the white people that talk about white privilege, from what I've seen, experienced it. They lived with it. They had both parents. They came from wealth. They had everything sort of taken care of and given to them. And for whatever reason, they, I guess, feel guilty about it and needed an explanation. And rather than recognize it as their parents' hard work and success and financial privilege, it became white privilege. Well, I have this because I'm white, obviously. So that way they I guess don't have to face it, or they can lump other people in and sort of spread the guilt around over a wider population. I'm not sure exactly what the phenomenon is, but it definitely seems like it's a bunch of people who haven't suffered ever talking about suffering. And it's frankly, it's insulting to me because I've been through plenty of suffering to the point where, like, I've had to bury people that I care about, family and friends, and that was a lot easier than other things that I've been through. Like I'm at a point in my life after everything I've been through where it's hard for me to even cry anymore. And to be told by these people who have had everything given to them about my privilege, I just find
It's insulting.
It's insulting in the extreme, to the point where it's like I have to suppress a good amount of rage and aggression that I have built up in me because of what I've been through, and wanting to see them suffer, and like wishing pain on this person so that they would have some awareness of what life can be like, because they just obviously don't know in most cases.
I think their suffering has only been mild inconveniences,
Bad grades,
or
some,
waiting for their mom to pick them up,
or
or
they didn't
whatever.
get their order at Starbucks or some shit.
Yeah, and like you said, it's probably these rich people who've it sounds like projection.
Well,
Where
I'll give some credit in that, it's probably middle class. Most of them, I wouldn't assume that rich. I think rich people have slightly more awareness because they have access
well,
to better education.
and rich center, I wouldn't say they're really dirt poor. That's what I should probably have
Right.
defined it more.
They lived
They're
very comfortable lives, is
yeah,
what it comes down
that's what I was saying.
to. They didn't want for anything.
Yeah,
Um,
they that's what I meant in a sense where they've been basically sheltered from the hardships of life,
yep.
and they're just projecting that this is how it has to be for everyone else as well, and
Right. So
that's
it's kind of interesting. It's like they had the life of Buddha, but didn't come to the same conclusions and sense of brotherhood with the rest of people.
yeah.
That they've taken their sense of entitlement and projected it out to everybody, and done seemingly everything to take no responsibility and do no deep inflection.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing is self-reflection and introspection and self-awareness. I think it is a big attribute that they don't have.
And it puzzles me. It's really something that I wish I could pick apart somebody's brain or several people's brains and be like, why do you think this way? How do you justify it? How do you not see, for instance, the greater pain in the world, especially in the face of bitching about microaggressions? That if I, I mean, even on that point, like, how do you not see that if that's what you really care about, if that's what you think is the worst thing going on in the world, or at least in the Western world, in the U.S., how good life really is, if that's the worst thing happening? Like,
Yeah, I agree, because there are still people dying of either thirst or hunger or diseases or whatever in the world right now, and this is the worst thing you can think of. Is it's really not just it's really insulting for the people dying, really, because this is the issue of our age, is microaggression and all the sorts of nonsense. And just like you said, it would be interesting talking to these people, but they won't, because they see you as an other, as
mhm.
an evil. They manifest this evil and just lump you in with this and label it something they like, Nazi or sexist or racist, whatever they want to call it, so they can justify this feeling of rage with which they have, which is basically just making them more miserable. And they don't they're not gonna have a happy life that way. uh how you live a happy life, many ways. For some people it's marriage, for some people it's not marriage, for some people it's work, for some people it's family. Like, there are also sorts of factors, but to be able to recognize what you want and what you think is going to make you happy, instead of focusing on these st- I would say just stupid issues, is what's it's destructive and regressive. And that's why I see you have the, like I said, with this culture, with this franchise, with art and things like that in general, where I see they are going backwards and not exploring themes and not trying to improve or whatever. They're just going backwards. That's how I look at it.
It's well, actually, well, I have several thoughts. I'm trying to catch up. Um, but the whole thing about happiness, that's actually why I really like Jordan Peterson. I think he's onto something when he says that, what's really important is personal responsibility. That's a big part of it. But like the built up resentment and the anger and the backlash you get when you question somebody's assumptions about the way the world is, they're really quite scared. They're really concerned about what they think is going on, about the way they see the world operating. If you look at some of these tweets, right, it's always, think about this, right? People will say things are really bad, right? Like, you'll hear that all the time. Like, what? How is the world still this way? Or I've even heard people say things are getting worse. Society's getting worse. Life is getting worse.
Yeah, and they use current year as an argument as well.
Right. I mean, and that's always been. People are always like, "How are you still doing this in 2018?" Or they said that in like '99 and 2000. And like, how is this still a thing? How is saying that still a thing in 2018 is what I'm wondering. But, but,
That's quite creative. Why using the current year against the current year
yeah,
argument?
but they're really scared. They really see a darker world than existed 10, 20 years ago, and the numbers just don't support that. So they're under some form of hallucination. This is information that's been fed uh, from an authority. So I would suspect it came out of college, and it was convincing and compelling for some reason. And so that's where the question is, like, why?
Yeah,
They really see a darker world than existed. For instance, eh, I don't want to go back as far as the '60s, but definitely '80s, '90s, and probably early 2000s. And it's just not reality at all. By any metric that you can measure it, things are amazingly better than they've ever been, even in just my lifetime. So, where's that thought coming from? That's my question.
Yeah, I was gonna say that as well. Like, would you trade all the what we have now and go back to, let's say, 1950s or 60s? I don't think you would believe that life is that great compared to now.
No, there
Bec-
were some things that worked better, but there's no point in history that life has ever been this good, to use their word, this privileged, where we've had so much available to us, so many options, so much information really available, so many gadgets, so many things taken care of, and so little crime and risk, and like it's a really great time. But they think it's the worst. Why?
yeah, like crime, as you said, murder, starvation, and everything. It's still bad, but if you compare it to like 20 years ago, it's much better now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody would ever argue that the existence of crime or thirst or starvation or any of that is anything but a heartbreaking travesty. But it's still massively improved and continuing to improve. It's never been better.
Yeah, like I think it's just the emotional, like they just want to have everything nice and comforting. That, I think that's what it just boils down to the essence, to be honest.
But yeah, I mean, we all do, um, and that's the thing, though. It is in a way that it's never been in history, but they don't see it. So, like, how is it getting worse when it's getting better? How is it that when life is kind of at the point where we would want it to be, these people think we're moving away from the way we want it to be? Like, how is that happening? Where's the disconnect? You know, like, why are you so angry about the state of affairs when the state of affairs is so close to a perfect ideal
Mm,
and heading in that direction?
yeah, I think we've had a very interesting discussion. We've almost gone 90 minutes now, so don't want to retread everything we've talked about. Is there anything like you closing out you wanna end on, like in general, just what we talked about?
I would just say for the people that would see this that are interested in these sorts of ideas and discussions, and for instance, I would say if you like Sargon of Akkad or at least that style, I'm working on it. I'm getting there. I've actually been retraining myself for YouTube videos. So to rethink that channel. Like I said, I'm gonna try to work on something and produce something today because I've got the time. So just link that and check that out for anybody watching. But yeah, other than that, I'm good. I got a whole day ahead of me, and then you
All
gotta get to
right.
sleep though.
No, it's just 5, so I still have a few hours. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and see you guys next time. Bye.